everyone. Welcome back to the Beloved interview series here on Beloved Revealed, where we just provide kind of a meaning for the concept and identity of beloved. Last week we had Brother Tim, and this week we are going to introduce you to Sophie McDevitt, who is a dear friend of mine from college. We did theater together and had some classes together, and I just thought she would be a great addition and a hospitable person, a fun-loving person to have on this interview series. She did go to St. Mary's with me and graduated with a BSW, social work, and a BA in religious studies. And now she is currently doing the Masters of Divinity program at the University of Notre Dame. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Sophie, just to kind of do more of an introduction of yourself, whatever you want the community of Beloved Revealed to know about you, and then we'll get started.
Wonderful. Yeah. I think not a ton else to know about me. I'm engaged to be married to Joe, my fiance. He's great. And some of my different theological interests are I'm really into interfaith dialogue and also into liberation theology, specifically Black liberation theology. And my dream is to hopefully become a prison chaplain one day and work with folks coming out of incarceration. I'm a middle child. I like cats and long walks on the beach. So there you go.
We love it. Thank you very much for that introduction. I also love cats and long walks on the beach. So yeah, we'll just kick it off with the first question of, one, do you identify as beloved? Which I'm sure you do if I asked you to be on this interview. And two, what does that mean for you? What does the concept mean? What does, the title of beloved mean to you? If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I do identify as beloved. I think it's definitely been a journey to get there, and I think it's a journey to kind of stay there believing that. I really think my ultimate understanding of beloved comes from the creation story, ultimately, where God made creation and then saw it and said it was very good, which means if our creator saw us and labeled us good and loves us, then we must be good and we are loved, even if it's hard to keep in mind. I really enjoyed, I listened to your podcast, the part where you talked about your definition of beloved, and you had kind of mentioned that you were worried that maybe beloved comes across as a specifically feminine thing, or as a specifically I think it can come across as soft if you don't have a proper understanding. And in that, I think when you have a proper understanding of what love is, you understand how radical and intense it is to say beloved, as opposed to what we commonly think of when you say the word beloved. Mm-hmm. So I think that when I was first thinking about this, if I was to say a beloved daughter, the first thing that pops into my head is a cute little 6-year-old girl in a pink party dress and a beautiful bow, right? Which is wonderful. And she is lovely, but that doesn't work for me, in that I don't think I'm always sweet and petite and easy to love. I can be rough and tumble, and I can be aggressive, and I can be a little overbearing. And so what does that mean if beloved means a cute little girl in a party dress? What does that mean for me as a grown adult who wants to do things work with people coming out of prison? It seems insufficient to say that's what beloved is. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we really need a theological understanding of love. And I think a common definition for that is love is willing the good of another, right? We're willing the good of the other, specific that other. And that's a much more radical type of love. That's the kind of love that leads a mom to give her child for adoption because she knows that that child needs more resources than she has, or she's not mentally prepared, or whatever it is. That's not a soft love. That's not a fluffy thing. That's a really intense, hard thing to live into, that you have to choose to live into. And so I think when we see love as Christ wills your good always, no matter what, Christ wills your good, that is much more intense and much more sufficient than the romantic love of Hallmark movies. God so loved us that God gave God's only son to die on the cross for us, right? That means that we as Christians have a God who suffers with us, suffers physical torture and physical death and all of those things, but also suffers some really relatable emotional pain. I think often when we hit this point, people talk about how Christ knew hunger and thirst in the desert. And I think that's a really great image for people who've truly known hunger and thirst. I personally I've never known real hunger and thirst to the point of like pain and possible death, right? And I know some have, but I haven't. And so really what hits me is like the emotional pain that Jesus knew, in that I think about like Jesus dying on the cross and watching his mother watch him die. If somebody came to me and they were like, I'm gonna like torture you, or I'm gonna torture your mom, right? I would absolutely say, torture me. Do whatever you want to me. I can endure that. I cannot endure watching you torture my mother, right? And the only thing probably more torturous than watching them torture my mother is watching my mother watch them torture me. That makes sense, right? Like, because my mother's ultimate torture would be me suffering. And so I think about like the emotional pain Jesus knew of his mother watching him die, that I just can't imagine that agony. And I think that that's really important for us when perhaps in a world, at least in my context, where a lot of my suffering is emotional, and that Christ didn't just know physical torture and death, which seems like far off from my experience, but God knew intense loneliness. God knew like intense pain of watching loved ones suffer. Like God loved us so much that God was willing to experience that too. And God's been there too. And we are loved even in that suffering, and even in crying out like, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the fact that like God chose those words, the words of the Psalm 22, so that we can cry out with Christ's words when we're suffering, because we're so beloved that even our like prayers that seem like turning away from God are literally quoting Christ. They're literally like aligning ourselves with Christ. And I think that that's really important to know, that to be beloved is not to like never feel like you're turning from Christ. To be beloved does not always mean a nice, pretty, cute relationship with God you can put on Instagram. Sometimes it means like an agonizing cry out about, why has God done this to me? Or why has God done this to someone I love? Or why is the world the way it is? And why does coronavirus exist? And like so many things we could cry out to God about. Like even Jesus, the OG beloved, like did this. Even he cried out.
Yeah, I really like that, because I feel like whenever I discovered this concept of beloved, or this identity of beloved in myself, it was like in the deepest parts of my suffering, like emotional suffering, not so much physical, like you were saying. But I really got to know like how much I was loved in that suffering. And I think that's a really powerful image too, with like Mary watching her son die, and how like the Lord didn't want, like Jesus didn't want this pain for his mother, but like he did all of this for like the greater good, like for to save not only his mother and his disciples, but all of us. And I think that's just like a super powerful theological image that you brought to my mind that I will be reflecting on for quite some time. I think that like overall it's just really powerful how like in the depth of our suffering and in the depth of our brokenness, we find our belovedness. And I'm almost wondering, kind of want to take it to your social work and like your experiences with encountering people in the field. They are obviously probably experiencing more than emotional like trauma than we do, or emotional suffering than we do. So how do you kind of interact with people in the social work field and like bring them love, first of all, because like you recognize your belovedness and you spread that love with them, but how do you also like help them recognize like you are loved out of all of this suffering, like you are loved?
That's certainly something I am always working towards doing better, I hope. And that's kind of what I want my life's work to be, right? Is how do I communicate to people who have been shown such cruelty that they are deeply loved? And I think for me, it really comes down to unabashedly giving of your time, in that even in like a social work role, like I used to work with in a like transitional living facility for people coming out of incarceration. So it was like a house, there were only 16 beds. So it really felt more like a community, but everybody who was there had been incarcerated within the last year. It could be jail, it could be prison, it could be like a secondary facility kind of transitioning out. There's like a step between prison and freedom, like a work release facility. That's what I'm looking for. So many people struggling with poverty, lack of resources coming out of incarceration, all of them have been a part of like really big systems, right? Whether it be they've been in the prison system, they've been in the foster care system, they've had to work through the system of churches to get the food they need and the bed to sleep in, right? Like they've been put through every process, right? And the challenge is that they're as a social worker, you're given a sheet typically, and there's like an intake, and you have to ask about these things. But showing them that it's not just, I need this information to figure out what programs you qualify for. And it's more, I am interested in you, who you are as a human and what you survived and what you've been through. And like showing you that I have enough time for you, right? Even I probably got 4 other clients I've got to meet with today, and there's a bunch of papers and all of this, right? But right now, all I care about is how are you, especially with social work. Sometimes you're standing in really vulnerable places, and it's easy to forget they're vulnerable places. Like when you're meeting with someone who just got out of prison, like think about, you were in prison, and now 5 hours later, you are not in prison, and you're sitting in front of me, like a random 22-year-old at 23. And she's asking you if you've ever been sexually abused, and you're like, oh my, like, who am I, where am I, like, I haven't even had a chance to call my mom. Like, maybe your mom knows you're out, maybe your mom doesn't, who knows who gave you a ride from prison to wherever. You might not be from the state you're in. Like, there's so many things going on here. But the way, like, I think the way of love is just showing them that, like, I'm a human being who's connecting with you, a human, regardless of your criminal history, like your like socioeconomic status, your race, your whatever it is. Like, I'm here for you. What do you need right now? And I think that that is something that can be alarming almost, because I see clients like shut down and kind of be like, I don't know what you're looking for from me, but like, here are the answers because I've been through the system, here are the answers I'm prepared to give. And it's like, I forget the form. Like, we'll figure it out. I'll remember what you said. We'll fill out the form later. But like, what's going on with you is a different encounter. And it's not always possible, but I think there are little ways to show people, like, I'm engaging with you because you were created good, regardless of like what you've done or what's happened to you or anything. Like, God created you and named you good. And so you're good at your core. And I am only here to show you that, like, to show you that goodness, reflect it back to you, and show how loved you are, even if it's just by me in our 30-minute session to figure out where you're going next.
Yeah, I really like that. And it reminds me of just, the concept of ministry of presence and just like sitting with a person and loving them where they're at. Because this week I had an experience with a homeless man who was just like very drunk in our church, and I had to ask him to leave because we have to lock up for mass and not welcome people into mass right now, unfortunately, due to COVID. And he couldn't make it out the door. So I like sat with him the entire mass. We just kind of sat in the back until someone could come and pick him up. And like in that moment, I knew that like no preaching, no like nothing I could say would help this man besides just like sitting next to him and like placing a hand, sorry, not COVID friendly, but like placing a hand on his shoulder and like praying over him myself, but like knowing that me saying like, God will save you, or like things like that won't help him in the moment, but just like loving him where he was. And by doing that is just like sitting with them, like where they're at and what they're going through in that moment. And I think that sounds like a lot of what you do for your ministry as well. Everyone deserves like this title of beloved, no matter where they're at, no matter like their brokenness, their sins, their suffering, whatever it may be. Everyone is beloved, and it's like ministry of presence or supporting them in whatever way possible in their brokenness is like reaffirming that identity in them as well. So that was just my thought, but
No, I absolutely agree. That's the thing. At the end of the day, like none of us have done anything to be worthy. That it's wholly based in God, like God's grace. And of course, we can do good works and act in faith and like try to grow in faith and all of that. But at no point do we earn this, and at no point does anybody else earn or lose this. This isn't something that can be lost.
Yeah, it like goes back to the creation story where it's like you are created good. No matter where you go past, that first moment of creation, like you are created good, and like you have the opportunity to like delve into this good, this belovedness that you are, and kind of like explore that. So I guess that leads me to the next question, which is, how do you like live out your belovedness? What does that look like for you, living out that goodness of, that you've had since you were created?
I think for me, a big part of it is my work in like trying to communicate to other people that they are beloved and that Christ loves them and that I love them and that that's not dependent on what they do or how they act. A hard thing also is to let yourself be loved that way too. in whether it's by family or like a romantic partner or a friend, like to allow yourself to be loved unconditionally and allow yourself then to be seen in some really vulnerable and not happy, not light places, and to recognize that in the same way I long to love others in their darkness and in their brokenness, and show them that like this does not take them out of the love of God. I have to let other people see me and my dirt, like my dirtiness, my brokenness, my sadness, and say like, this does not take you out of the love of God, and it doesn't take you out of the love of me, which is something I'm currently working on. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, even if you just wanted to talk a little bit about like, I don't know if your whole life you were called to marriage or like whatever you've been called to, but like right now you're engaged and you're doing the thing. So what is it like to like live in relationship with someone and recognize their belovedness and like still live out your like kind of like this independent thing, like you were living out this identity in some way and he is living out this identity in another, and how does that like come together in a sense?
It's really wonderful. I didn't plan on, well, I guess I thought I could get married. Coming out of high school, I was discerning religious life, and a lady at my parish actually saw me read and was like, I see God in you, you need to go visit these sisters. And so I went to visit a community in Rock Island, Illinois, the Benedictine sisters at St. Mary's Monastery. They're beautiful, wonderful people. And I stayed there for the weekend. And basically at the end of the weekend, I was like, if I join religious life, this is the community I want. Like, I love these women. I love like the rule of St. Benedict. I think they're doing this beautifully. And so I asked a sister, like, what do I do? Like, I'm 18, so I'm obviously not joining tomorrow. Like, what do I do? And it's so fun. It's so funny because you always anticipate like these, like, most of the ladies were older, right? And so you anticipate these like older sisters to be these like sages that sit up on a mountain ready to like impart spiritual advice. And basically this sister told me that I needed to get a college degree and date a boy. And those, like, depending on how those two things went, that would help me. She said, like, you're going to need a college degree to get a job. And like we did at this particular monastery, they all had like work outside the convent for the most part. And then she said, for me, the thing that made me know I wanted religious life was that I dated a boy and he was like a good, godly man. He was wonderful. He was the kind of man I would marry. And I thought to myself, I just don't want to do this forever. So I'm not gonna, like, basically. And so she said he was very understanding. They broke up. She joined the convent. And so I said, all right, I'll go to college. I'll date a boy. I go to college. I went to St. Mary's College with women's college. It was a little hard to find a boy at women's college. And on my junior year, I met this boy who was like cute and nice and friends with my friends. And so I kind of like pursued him. We ended up dating. We dated for 5 months, and then he broke up with me. And that was the start of my senior year. And I said, well, glad we figured that out. We've dated a boy. I'm going to go to the MDiv. I'm going to discern religious life, and I'm going to pop back to Rock Island after that. And then I met Joe in the October of my senior year, and we started dating. And basically through our relationship, I came to realize I was like, this is what I want to do forever. And that was pretty crazy and pretty shocking, because I kind of thought, I was like, well, I dated a boy, and while a good man, I don't think he was like emotionally ready for what I was looking for. And it was also kind of unfair that I think to a certain extent I was using him as okay, so convent or no, and like you're around and you're good. Like, he was a good guy. So anyway, I got a little sidetracked, but
I love it.
I just think it's important for people to see like the authenticity of vocation stories, and that sometimes it seems wrapped up in a like neat bow, and it's really not, right? So and I think the cool thing about being engaged is how real it is now, like having conversations about like how we want to structure our family. And the thing is, you can have conversations about this is like all of our children will like sit around reading scripture together, and they will simply feel so like fraternal to each other and like loving to us, right? But then there's also just like me freaking out because like, why would you put the spoons in between the knives and the forks when everybody knows it's like knife, spoon, fork? Like, or I don't know. There was something about the silverware. I don't even remember what it was, but I remember thinking like, can I move this fork where the spoon is and the spoon where the fork is, because that's how it's supposed to be set up. And he's like, no, because it doesn't need to be set up that way. And I'm like, but this is how I feel comfortable and it must be set up this way. And so it's just funny to see how much of like, as you're discerning life with someone, that it you have these lofty ideas and we really line up like ideologically and like our core values and what that looks like, and still trying to make a life with someone is like messy and weirdly intimate in the fact that you're like, I want this way and there's no logical reason for me to want this way. I just prefer it this way and you should prefer it this way too. And they might not, right? Like, and that doesn't mean you can't be married. It just means now you're having like conversations about things like how you can set up your silverware drawer. You have to just count on like your significant other to meet you in times where you cannot reasonably discuss things and say, right now I'm emotional and this is important. I'm not talking about silverware anymore, just other things. But like, I can't be questioned on this right now. Right now I just need you to be there for me. And like, we can later, then it's like, okay, we need to discuss that because we can't leave it at that. I just didn't know there was this much to learn about myself because I just thought I made sense. And I think the farther I get into this thing, I realize that so much of me is just preferences, and someone else can have different preferences, and they can be like really important preferences for like no discernible reason.
I was reading some article about marriage and just like how you have to kind of start from scratch and be like, so like, how do you put the like toilet paper, like do you have the toilet paper on top or like underneath? Or like little tiny things, or like, do you use paper towels or do you use like actual towels to like dry dishes? Or like, just even in community life right now, like with my roommates, it doesn't even have to be marriage, just like living with friends. It's like it's just so many unique aspects of people coming into play and like living circumstances. And I'm like, there's so much that I've learned about myself in community, and I've been in it for only a few months. So I can't imagine like marriage as that starts to unfold. Like, it's just going to be a lifelong journey of learning things about yourself and your spouse. So I think that's pretty cool.
Well, thanks. I'm very excited. And I think you're right in that like community gives that to you too. The way my program works, we also have some seminarians who are like in our program with us. And it's so fun to see how well these seminarians know each other, because at this point they've done like a postulant year before, like they've done a postulant year and a novitiate year right before this. And that novitiate year, they were like up in the mountains in Colorado Springs with just each other in like a lot of silence and only writing hand letters to their families. And so it's so funny that every now and again, I'll like, one of them will just say like, oh yes, like Alex is going to do this way, yada, yada, yada. And like, and they just kind of like good naturedly love that that's how their brother is going to operate in this class today, or what, like they're going to be exactly 6 minutes late as opposed to 3 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. And it's so beautiful to see how well they know each other just from living in community with one another.
Yeah, and I also think it's something to say with like living in community, you really start to see how other people love well, and like how I love versus how my roommate Katie and Maddie and Matt love. And it's just like I learned so much from the way that they love other people, whether that be like loving, our parishioners or just each other. There's just so much to learn, and like things that I point out where I'm like, I would like to love better in this way because like Katie set that example for me or something like that. So yeah, I guess just a thought that I've been having with the whole concept of beloved in general is like the motto for Beloved Revealed is beloved, or beloved, however you want to say it, be loved, and then be loving. And I'm really trying to think about like this be loving portion of things, and what I was just saying, like other people love so differently, and I love in a different way from my neighbor and things like that. But I kind of this is just a random question that I think is important to talk about, is just like, what are ways that we can love other people better? And I know we talked a little bit about it with like your social work placements and ministry placements of loving people by being like ministry of presence, but can you think of any like concrete ways that we can love people more, like despite their brokenness or despite the complexities of humans, basically.
Yes, one of our main mottos is assume goodwill. And the idea there is just that when there's a misunderstanding or you feel like someone was short with you or something like that, assume that they don't just hate you, assume that they were short on time, they're running between classes, they're thinking about something else. Like you have to give them kind of the benefit of the doubt, basically. And it sounds trite, but it also looks like it I think is really a great opportunity for formation. I think that that's something I've really worked hard to do, because often, like, when you assume goodwill, I think you're usually right. Usually something else is going on, right? The person is married, they have kids, they live in community and just got in a fight with one of their brothers, or there's like a, who knows, like mother superiors on their back. I don't know entirely what community life looks like, but like there's lots of reasons people could act a certain way, and to just assume that that's not what they intended, I think gives them grace, which we all need. Also gives yourself, like, keeps you from just stewing in your head and getting angry and like having a really negative outlook on somebody that you just don't need to have a negative outlook on, really. So I think that's a really concrete way when it comes to like loving people. I also, this is going to make me sound like a total hippie, and this is like totally social work coming out here, but we also just did like the 5 love languages in our women's group, and I think a lot of people know about it by now. You can Google it. It's basically the idea that like people communicate love in different ways, and this marriage and family therapist put it down to 5. I'm going to leave it to you guys to go look into them, but it basically means that like when you're living in community or living with a romantic partner or even a friend, that you can be giving love a certain way, but if that's not how they receive love, then they don't know that like that's what you're trying to give them, right? Like I see this with me and Joe, and that like my love language is acts of service and his is words of affirmation, right? But the problem there is that like I've like spent all day cleaning the kitchen, and I've like prepared the living room all nice and it's like beautiful, and I'm so happy that like he's going to walk into a clean apartment after work or whatever, and he walks in and says like beautiful things to me, but like didn't see that like the kitchen was clean, right? And in turn he showered me with beautiful words, but I'm like, but you didn't see the kitchen. And so it ends up we've both just like thrown love at each other, and both of us have entirely missed that love was communicated, right? Yeah. So when you're open in general to the idea that someone might communicate love differently than you, it allows you to look for like their attempts differently. So now, even if like words of affirmation isn't my love language, I know that when Joe is saying a lot of beautiful words, that what he's saying is I love, like that, like he's communicating love. So even if that's not how I receive love, I now know that's what he's doing, right? As opposed to just saying like, you just talk a lot or something, or he could say like, you're just always running around doing activities. And it's like, no, I'm serving, I'm trying to love you.
Right. I like that idea too, because I feel like sometimes I don't know well enough how I need to be loved. I guess just thinking about your whole like discernment of how you like to be loved type of thing. What's some advice for other people of like, how do you figure out how you need to be loved? Like how you can feel, worthy and happy with yourself and just like, confident. How did you figure that out?
This is like perhaps an insufficient answer. In general, with like, if you want to take the 5 love languages quiz, I promise they didn't sponsor this.
That's what I was about to say, like besides like the 5 love, like no, but actually go take the 5 love languages quiz because it's so helpful.
But then also beyond that, I think that really for me, taking note of like when your best friend or your partner or your sister does something for you and it really just sticks with you, like I think telling them that, saying like, hey, you might not remember that I like forgot my hairbrush and you like drove all the way home to get it and bring it back to me, but that really meant something to me. And one, that just does good for your relationship because it like lets them know that you saw something they did or said or thought of you for, right? 2, it might clarify for you like, this is something that stuck with me, and that's like something that I really like received love from. And it lets them know that that might be a thing to do again, right? Like that's something that really impacts you. Again, one of the cool things about the like 5 love languages is that it also then shows you how someone can be hurt more easily, right? And that like, if words of affirmation is your love language, for someone to criticize you with words hurts more, right? And then like for me, like acts of service, for someone to try to force me to do chores, it like it makes me mad. It makes me feel like they've like denied me a chance to give them love, and makes me feel like they just don't appreciate everything I've ever done, which is so much more dramatic than someone asking you like, can you do the laundry, right? But I really think that paying attention to what sticks with you over time and affirming someone when they do something that really sticks with you is, I think, a good practice, and it helps you take note of like what really impacted me and like made me feel loved.
Yeah, I also, this is another pitch to like a personality type of test, but I know there's a lot of them out there, and some of them I'm just like, okay, like this applies for everyone. But the Enneagram test, I don't know if you've ever taken it, Sophie, but it is actually like pretty convenient when getting to know yourself, your personality type. Like I'm a 2, so I'm a helper. There's specific, there's the whole like document about what that means. And I think it's funny though, because there's like you could compare types. So like my friend is an 8 and I'm a 2, and I can compare like why, like when we would bash heads, or like why that would happen based off of like our personalities and how we like give love, how we receive love. So I actually do think like tests like these are really important to take, just to kind of get to know yourself more, and to like figure out how, one, you like to be loved, like what makes you feel good and confident as a person, but also like how do I love, and how can that be frustrating when people don't receive this type of love.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I definitely think those things are really helpful when when it comes to like romantic partners or living in community, or because even then, even if it's not even necessarily about the results, and it is about like now you're having conversations with someone you have to like live really intimately with, and say like, this is what, like, here's a conversation about how this scenario would play out in my head, and what you would think and what I would think, so that we have some idea that we might not think the same thing. So we're more likely to converse about it than just assume the other one knew what we wanted and chose otherwise.
So go take the tests. I think just kind of we can like wrap up the beloved talk right now, but do you have any other like final words of advice, or just stories that you had prepared to share, or anything of that sort?
I think one thing that really, just kind of a story I wanted to share in like helping me understand like me. Okay, the beloved. Hey Sophie, the dog's name is Sophie also. Can we go somewhere else, friends?
I like high key want to keep this in the video.
One story I think want to share. I was reflecting on your question of like, how did you come to understand yourself as beloved? And for me, I think my big understanding of like us as beloved, and the fact that we can never like lose our belovedness, that wasn't something I like just truly believed. And I think it's something I came to know and then had to understand as a theological concept. And that came from like my junior year of college was like just a bad time, and it was like rough and dark, and I like and I was like kind of dating this guy as a coping mechanism, who was lovely, but just like both of us were not ready for each other. And I start my senior year, right? And like he's broken up with me. I fall asleep on my carpet. I wake up with a face rash from the carpet. It was a whole thing. It's there like a week. My friends are like, okay, you need to go to the nurse and get her to give you something. And she's like, here's this medicine. It will heal you, right? But if you use too much of it, it's gonna like scar your face. And basically, I have this like big thing. It looked like the continent of Africa almost on my face. And she's like, so here's the challenge. If the face rash stays too long, it's gonna scar your face, and it's gonna look like that. If you use the medicine but you use too much, it's gonna scar your face and it's gonna stay like that. But you need the medicine to get rid of it so your face doesn't scar, which was just like a wild ride in general. Basically, I was kind of feeling my lowest, and I was like, what does it mean to be happy? And like if Christ loves us, like why is the world crappy? And why is like it down to the fact that even the medicine that would heal me could also scar me? Like what's that about? And I think it was in like seeking to treat myself as a human, and actually like giving myself a break to a certain extent of like, I need basic things like sleep and good food and time with friends and breaks from schoolwork, but I also need to do my schoolwork. Finding an actual stable balance gave me the opportunity to look for like what love felt like. And I really think the first time like I actually understood what it meant to be beloved was my sister gave birth to my nephew my senior year of college. And I was the first one to the hospital after they'd given birth. And the poor girl had like labored for 2 nights. So I get there, they hand me my nephew, And both my sister and my brother-in-law are like, you've got them because we've got to go to sleep. Like they've been awake for 2 days and they just fall asleep. And I'm just sitting here with this baby. That baby had been my motivation of like, I want to be the kind of person I would want my niece or nephew to meet. And I know I'm going to meet this baby come around her due date in February. Being like given that baby and thought to myself that like, this isn't even my child and I would do anything for this baby. And no matter what this baby does, I'm going to love this baby like so much, right? Which was kind of just a funny thing to think when it's just a person you've just barely met. And I'm looking at him and I'm literally like, one day this baby is going to be like a 16-year-old and he's going to hate us all and he's like going to be too cool for Aunt Sophie and for whatever else, right? And like, and I'm going to love him more than he can ever imagine. And I think that for me, that was just like the smallest taste of like, if I can love a baby that's not even like my baby like that much, then surely God must love me so much more. Any perception I feel of God like hating me or thinking I'm dirty or like not good enough, that comes from me. That doesn't come from God. That might come from the devil even, but it's not coming from God. God's not saying you're unworthy. God's saying, please let me love you. And I'm saying, no, please don't look at me, you know? And I think that that's a really hard thing to accept, but a good thing to know. God's always going to love you, and not in a soft, feel good way. Like even when you're like really in it, God loves you. And it's your like, and it is our job to turn back to God and figure out, okay, how can I repair this relationship? And how can I like live the way God intends and like grow closer to God? But it's never God abandoning us.
That's really beautiful just to think about like how much you love your nephew and like how much I love, my parents and my brother and my family members, and like how much more escalated that is about God loving us. Like it is the most powerful love ever. And like we haven't even felt the entire fullness of that. Yeah, I just think overall what we do now and like, recognizing how much we are loved from God and like living that out, like he is preparing us now, one, to be examples for like future kids or like our future nieces and nephews, but also just in preparation for like uniting fully with him, love at its fullest extent. But yeah, I think that's really beautiful, and thank you for sharing that story, because I think just for everyone in Beloved Revealed, reflecting on like, who do you love the most and who do you feel as if like do you feel like your parents love you the most, or like a friend of yours loves you the most, and like times that by 100, and that's how much you are loved by God, who created us good and who wants us to like own our goodness and to really like explore that and live that out. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this interview. I know that it's beneficial for me, and I'm sure for many more people, just like one, talking about relationships with people, and two, coming to know like how we love, how we like to be loved, and how like we love others best. And I think there's just like good concrete content that came out of this interview. So thank you. If you want to close us in prayer, or I can, whatever you want. I think that's a good ending to all interviews.
Yes, I would love to close us in prayer.
Cool.
All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear Creator God, thank you for making us good. Thank you for loving us without reserve and without abandon, and help us with abandon, and help us to seek you in each other and in our relationships, and help us to honor you as we work to move closer to you and closer to each other in true, authentic love. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Sophie.
Thank you.